a few more seconds, but I think that's probably good. Okay. Hopefully you can all see the results. It looks like we have a good mix in here, and definitely some learning happening. So that's really good. That's what we wanted. Right. Did everyone see that? Mm-hmm. Okay. Perfect. Okay.
I didn't. It popped up and then it disappeared from my screen. The poll results.
Oh yeah, it won't stay up there. I have to undo it to keep the meeting moving along. Okay. So first, let's get started by having each of the panelists take 2 or 3 minutes to just tell us briefly about yourself, your company, and your experience with a specific funding source that you're here to talk about, and maybe a little bit about how you got involved. Who'd like to go first?
I'm happy to go first, if that works. Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Hi, I'm Sandy Shotwell. My background is basic science research, and then I shifted into technology licensing and ultimately into consulting and entrepreneurship. So I've been involved with helping to found 2 life science based companies, both of which have had SBIR and STTR grants. One of them, Design Medics, is the one I'll probably talk about the most. I was a co-founder and I'm currently CEO of the company, and we used SBIR grants quite a bit to bring, basically to bring something from discovery stage all the way into the clinic.
Great, thank you, Sandra. Who's next?
I can go next.
Okay.
So I'm Benny here. I am a former basic researcher. I got my PhD in neuroscience and spent about 12 years between grad school and postdoc working in the lab, and then had a pretty substantial career shift when I got into the investment world. And about 4 years ago, I joined TI Oregon to manage the angel program there, and got pretty well embedded in the Oregon startup community, working both with angel investors and with the startups in Portland and in Oregon at large, and now that I live in Seattle, up here as well. And then more recently, I also joined Elevate Capital as the senior venture associate, and have been helping close out our investments in Fund 1, position us for Fund 2, and actually was involved in Elevate getting awarded the commercialization gap fund from the state of Oregon, which is explicitly for investing in science and research-based companies. So we're really excited to be rolling that out here in the next 2 to 3 months once we get everything all buttoned up with that.
Molly, you're up.
I think it's my turn. My name is Molly Lindquist. I founded a crowdfunding platform called Consano after my own diagnosis with breast cancer in 2011. I came out of that personal experience really wanting to support specific medical research that might help my daughters avoid walking my breast cancer path, and did some type A due diligence myself and didn't find a way to really direct my small donations. Although I do think the Lindquist Cancer Center of Excellence has quite a ring. That was not the amount of money I was going to be donating to these causes, and really didn't find the level of specificity and transparency that I was looking for personally. And this coincided with Kickstarter's approach to $1 billion pledged, with such noteworthy crowdfunding campaigns as the Coolest Cooler and the potato salad recipe. And really, I thought, man, if people will donate to that, maybe, this would be a good mechanism to actually get funding, which is greatly needed by researchers, and connect patients directly with the research that matters to them. So I kind of channeled my, Stanford economics and investment banking and stay-at-home momness, which now that we're all quarantined here, I'm sure many of you have a much bigger appreciation for these skills that brings, and started Consano in 2013. So we're nonprofit philanthropic gifts. We've worked with academic centers across the country, as well as small biotech labs that are often spin-offs of academic centers.
Great, thank you all for that nice, brief, concise overview. Another question for all of you. Can you tell us a little bit about the process of obtaining funding through your mechanism, and maybe speak to the range of funds that can be obtained, any considerations of equity, typical role of a founder, other important things like that?
I'm happy to start again. So with small business grants, they can range from, phase one, a modest $150,000 or so, up to multi-year grants that might be 3 years for $1 million per year. Those are unusual, the latter. Let's see, I'm forgetting what the other parts of the question were, Melissa.
Do founders have to give away equity, and what's the role of a founder after receiving your funding or SBIR funding?
So the grant has less to do with founders. It is a grant. It's non-dilutive, so there's no equity. As a result, it's an excellent leverage with any private investment that you may have, and investors see these grants as both a validation of the technology and the product opportunity, and they see it as a nice non-diluting leverage for their investment. The role of the founder, it depends on whether the founder is also the lead scientist, because these grants, like any federal grant, are strongly dependent on a strong lead principal investigator. That may be the founder, but very often it's not the founder. It might be a co-founder or chief scientific officer. If the founder is on the business side, they may not be quite as successful at getting small business grants.
So could you maybe explain a little bit further for those on the call who might be more familiar with research grants? Could you explain the difference between a research grant and SBIR?
Yeah, absolutely. There are some real differences. People who are familiar with research grants are familiar with the peer review process. I should say that I'm most familiar with NIH grants. I think NSF is reviewed in a relatively similar way. Department of Defense may also have peer review, but they have more ability to reach through and pick projects that match their goals and mission. But when you're talking about the NIH, the peer review process means that there are other scientists reviewing your grant. There may also, in this case though, there may be business people, because the grant is really intended to help commercialize a product, not explore basic research questions. It's based on looking at the product development opportunity as well as the quality of the science. So you're looking at things like innovation and facilities and team, things that you might be familiar with, but there's often a commercialization angle. Once you get into a phase 2, you have to provide a commercialization grant, which demonstrates that you've got a plan for how to take your work and develop it into a product. That's probably the key difference. You really have to focus on that.
Great. I'll come back to that commercialization piece in a minute, but why don't we go on to either Molly or Ben?
So,
remember the question.
Yeah. So with angel and venture investing, the amount of money that's available is really it's a decision that's made between the person seeking the investment and the investors. So these can be investments that are anywhere from $25,000 all the way up to several $1 million. And there really is no limit as to how much investment is available. It's more about how compelling is the opportunity for the investors and how does it compare to other opportunities that they are looking at. So when we're evaluating companies, we're building on what Sandy was talking about, we're looking at companies that are a little bit beyond that basic research stage that have probably already received a phase 1 SBIR or done something similar and are now ready to actually take their product and start to put it in the market, or they've got an idea about what the regulatory pathway is, and they know how much money they need to achieve milestones in order to see success. Our expectation is that those companies are going to raise more money than just what we or the early investors are going to be able to give them. But in order to do that, they need to show that that stepwise progression. And so that's where these different levels of investment come in. So moving from basic research grants to federally funded commercialization grants to early stage angel investing to a little bit later stage angel and early venture investing is effectively a money ladder to move companies to a place where they're going to be successful, either commercializing their product or selling the company or the idea to a much larger organization that has the infrastructure already in place to take that product and make it available to a lot of people. You think you asked about equity too?
I did.
Certainly with angel and venture investing, equity is a part of the discussion. And typically there is an assumption that some equity will have to be exchanged for capital. But the discussion around equity is, I think, often gets overweighted when you're looking at these really early stage investments. Usually investors are investing in companies because they have some kind of experience with the industry. They may have some connections with potential customers. They bring a lot more value than just capital for these very early companies that really need that leg up if they're going to be successful. And so while equity is a consideration, it's something that most early investors think about to some extent, but want to make sure that the entrepreneurs and the founders are also still incentivized to be with the company long term. And so this is not someone trying to come in and buy the company outright. This is someone who sees the value and wants to help, and because it's an investment, is looking for the opportunity for a return as well.
Right. Do early stage investors ever provide other resources and support to the company aside from just funding?
Certainly potential customer introductions. One of our portfolio companies, we actually were able to help them get an introduction to a strategic partner, which has really helped them move their manufacturing forward, has helped support them in their international rollout of their platform. A lot of times our investors and our advisors will help with technical considerations and regulatory considerations. And we also have access to, for instance, regulatory attorneys or intellectual property attorneys that can help them strategize how best to use the capital that they have available to position the company to be successful and also protect the company from competitors.
Great, thank you. So Molly, same question. What does process of obtaining crowdfunding look like through your platform? Does it differ from other platforms?
Yeah, there are typically two types of crowdfunding platforms. I call it the winner takes all, which you have a goal and you have to hit that goal, or eat what you kill, as they sometimes say as well, which is basically you keep whatever you raise. So we fall into the latter category. And just to kind of piggyback on what Ben was saying, the ROI for Consano investors / donors is really a return on impact more so than a return on investment, because often what we've found is that, we started this thinking, oh, this is a great way for people who are going to donate $100 to a research project, a way to give them kind of a way to participate and receive some stewardship for projects that they care about. And what we ended up finding out is there are actually a lot of individuals and family foundations that don't necessarily have the time to sift through all of the research going on out in the world to figure out what matches with their philanthropic priorities. So we've become a conduit for those types of opportunities where people actually aren't interested in equity, but rather their tax deduction, as well as the goodwill that comes with giving, of course. And really, in many cases for us, it's a meaningful way for people to channel, difficult experiences into something that helps others. And so, given the current climate that we're in currently, I think this is something that, I learned as a cancer patient a number of years ago. One day I did not care about cancer. The next day after my diagnosis, I did. And as we face, these challenges, COVID-19, of course, being a huge one that we're all facing together, people are looking for a way to help to channel their experience. In this case, pandemic-wise, this is unprecedented in terms of the economic ramifications. So I don't necessarily think people are going to be opening their philanthropic wallets until all of the fallout occurs with the stock market, et cetera. But I do think that, the more this wreaks havoc on our day-to-day life, the more people are looking for ways to channel that pain and that personal experience into the greater good. And that sounds very Pollyanna-ish, and I have been called Pollyanna by one of the NCI directors, but I quickly corrected him that it's Molly-Anna. But I really think what we're looking at is a little bit, again, more of the return on impact, and is typically most useful for researchers that are looking to raise around 25,000, or the PIs who then go on to become founders and have conduits again to often high net worth individuals that want to support their work. It's a very direct way to facilitate those philanthropic gifts.
Great. I have to say, it's a nice sentiment either way. So can you tell me a little bit about how you vet projects that are added to Consano? And if I wanted to add a project, how would I go about doing that?
Yeah, so I'll give you kind of the brief Consano history. 1.0 was really researchers listing their projects, the public supporting that, and we saw many, many donations, the majority of donations coming in honor and in memory of people, and launched kind of a GoFundMe type mechanism as a result of that, where families can actually start an honor page, usually in memory of someone that they love, sometimes in honor of someone going through, a life experience, and rally their community to raise funds. So in Consano 1.0, a researcher submits a project on the back end of our site, and then we actually have a scientific advisory board that reviews all projects. And I was very lucky to connect with Dr. Drucker at the Knight super early on, who really kind of helped us think through vetting process. How do you ensure that, people, particularly people going through times that might make them more vulnerable, can feel confident that any of the research they're supporting is, not only credible and legitimate, but really has the potential to lead to improvements for patients. So for us, that scientific advisory board is our gatekeeper. For Consano 2.0, the honor funds, we've now developed relationships with, I think we're at 35 academic centers across the country where we call for proposals. And what we're finding is we have a lot of families who are living with rare diseases, often super detrimental to day-to-day quality of life, who, don't necessarily have independent wealth such that they're going to start their own foundation, but really want to connect with these researchers doing the work that might help their family. So in that case, again, we work with academic partners, and sometimes with spin-off biotechs typically affiliated with academic centers, just to make sure that we can vet and ensure legitimacy, et cetera. But we're always looking for innovation that might otherwise go unfunded, that these families and communities can really connect to and feel like they're making a difference.
Great, thank you. Back to a question for all of you, maybe briefly, what, in terms of the type of healthcare technology or the stage of development, is there a best fit for your type of funding? Or are there things that either previous funding or experience that they should already have when they come to you? Yes, that's.
I can start that one. So now that Elevate's going to be managing the commercialization gap fund, or the innovation gap fund as we're calling it, we have the ability to support companies that are just coming out of the research stage all the way up to some significant commercialization. And that's something that hasn't really been, there's been a gap in the market between the research support and the actual investment capital. And so that's something that we're really excited about being able to offer. And so if you'd asked us a few months ago, we would have said we look for much more stable and much more developed companies. And now we're going to be able to help teams and help ideas that have a need in the market, but still need to go through some pretty substantial prototype development, meet some of those milestones and set them up for much more success raising. And then hopefully we'll be able to then help them with that next round of funding as well. But typically, angel investors and venture investors are looking for something more than an idea and something more than a clear need, but something that is really has a clear path towards that regulatory approval if that's required and adoption in the market. And a lot of times that adoption and something that will either turn investors on or turn investors off is, will insurers pay for it if it's a device or if it's a treatment of some kind. If this requires a substantial shift in insurance behavior, that's probably going to be a much harder sell to investors than if there are pre-established codes and you're providing something that is much better than what the current standard of care is. Most investors at our stage are probably not going to invest in pharmaceutical companies. Med devices, software, that kind of stuff that has a reasonable return for a reasonable amount of investment is much more attractive than something that is going to require hundreds of millions of dollars to get to market. And that's just simply the nature of the stage of investment and the amount of capital that's available at the early angel and venture rounds.
Good to note. Is there a, Tom, was that you?
Oh, that's Ben. So Ben, that's exciting. Elevate will be doing that for the state of Oregon. I'm sure some of the listeners might not know much about that program. I don't know if you've figured it out. Do you know how much money would be available and when you might foresee that opening?
So we are currently working with the state of Oregon. We should have funds hopefully within the next couple of months to start evaluating companies and begin deploying that. The fund is $5 million. That was defined by the state of Oregon, and that is planned to be a biennial fund. So there should be a new pool of capital every 2 years. We're working on our intake process. We've already got an initial pipeline of companies, but we're always looking for more potential candidates. And I'd be happy to talk about that in more detail, maybe towards the end of the Q&A. I don't want to take too much time away from this particular part, but we are getting ready for, we've got a team in place, both the investment team and advisors, and we're getting ready to start accepting applications and reviewing companies.
Great, thanks.
Great. Or if you have any online information that we can share about it, we'd be happy to spread the word as well.
Okay.
Is there, kind of on that note, is there the singular most important thing that angels or VCs are looking for in companies to invest in? Maybe one or two.
I don't think there's any one thing. What often turns angel and venture investors off from science and research-based companies is this tendency for a very, very technical team to come in and pitch an idea without having given a lot of thought to the commercial and business development side of that. And that's something that I've taken to heart in my role with, especially with Ty, is trying to coach entrepreneurs that, okay, you may really know the technology well, but we need to see that you understand the market and not just there's a big opportunity there, but who is the customer? Have you talked to the customer? Have you gotten feedback? How's the customer going to use this product? Things like I was talking about with the insurance coverage. Is that a consideration? What is the regulatory pathway if there is one? What are some of the milestones along the way that you need to hit, and how much does it cost to achieve those specific milestones? So really seeing a well-rounded team that has given a lot of thought to both sides of the business, the technical, and the business development side. So I think that's probably the most important. The second is, how big is the opportunity? Is it, I don't think anybody would question the importance of an opportunity, but there needs to be a clear indication of, okay, is this something that's going to help 1 or 2 people, or is this something that's going to help 100 or 200, 1,000 or 2,000? Like, we want to understand what the scale of the opportunity is and how best that can be supported. And sometimes angel investment is not the right support for that opportunity.
Okay, that's good to know.
May I join in with a thought,
Yes,
and that
please.
is just a bit of Design Medics history that might be helpful to some folks on the scientific side who might be listening. When Design Medics was initially established, there were three founders: an academic, David Payton from Portland State University Chemistry Department, myself with a mixed academic and commercialization background, and Lynn Stevenson, who had a great deal of experience with startup companies. And initially, I led the company when it was in a very early stage and got its its first couple of SBIR grants. And when we felt like the company was ready for private investment, for angel investment, we flipped our roles. Lynn Stevenson became the CEO because of her extensive track record with startup companies and leading startup companies and making returns for investors. And I think that was very favorably viewed. So that's something I think it's important for scientific founders to keep in mind, that they may be the appropriate founder for the first couple of years of a company, but at the point that a company is looking for private investment, they're definitely going to want to see someone on the leadership team who has experience taking products to market or to the next logical milestone that your type of company would get. In our case, it might have been to clinical trials. And also hopefully has a track record of making money for investors. The same thing on the small business grant side. It makes a huge difference in your success in getting a grant. No one will be surprised at this. If you've already received grants and you have a track record and a publication record. So the person who might be the most successful in leading the company and raising angel investment might not be the same person who would be the principal investigator on their small business grants.
I think that's a great point. Thank you, Sandra. And that allows me to go back and kind of dive in a little bit deeper with both of you on the commercialization aspects of team formation and advice that you have around where to look if you are, have more of a scientific background and you're struggling developing a commercialization plan, or you're struggling figuring out what your market is and targeting those types of things for investment. If both or either of you can speak a little bit more on that.
I'm happy to talk about the commercialization plan for the grants.
Great.
Let's see. Number one, the federal agencies often have examples of very, very highly rated successful grants, and those can include commercialization plans. They have guidelines for what they want to see in those commercialization plans, and they also have examples of ones that were successful. Locally, the OBI, OTRADI, has a group of biomentors. A number of them have experience with commercialization plan development and are available to help. There are a number of private consultants who do that. So there are a number of resources locally that one can draw on besides the online resources.
Great.
And I guess to add on to that, in terms of trying to find a partner that has more of the business experience, one of the biggest challenges is just getting into the community and starting to talk to people. And I find that tends to be one of the limiting factors for a lot of scientists that are trying to do this, and simply because they don't know where to go. And so whether it's talking to OBI or OTRADI or talking to Elevate, or even just going to some events, maybe you don't know anybody, but if you start talking about your idea, you might find some people who are interested, and it's building that network that is really how you're going to get the high quality people to join your team that you need to be successful. In terms of understanding who your customer is, that too can be as simple as cold calling people, or if it's a medical device, talking to some physicians, if it's some health IT or some infrastructure software, that could be going to the OHSU IT support or talking to the nursing staff that might have to use that software. What we typically look for is that commitment to really understanding who the customer is by boots on the ground. I'm not a huge fan of that term, but that's truly what it is getting in front of your potential customers and listening to their feedback. And that's how you're going to know whether your idea is going to have legs and really going to grow, or if you need to pivot your idea into something that the market is really ready to adopt.
Great.
I chime in with one thing too to kind of, again, piggyback on Ben. I would also add patience to the list of resources. I think that, you know, in terms of the target market, and of course it depends on, you know, the endeavor you're undertaking, but I do think it's an often overlooked, incredible source of pain points that entrepreneurs can address, or you can see if you actually are addressing the things that patients are looking for as in many times the end consumer.
That's great.
And I'd say that the federal agencies very much have come to understand this, to the extent that they now offer special grants to allow people, companies that have small business grants, go out and speak with, in the one instance I'm aware of, you know, 100 potential customers or related persons. So they're really getting on board and providing resources for people to be able to do this. The traditional small business innovation research grant does not allow for market research. And they've come up with a separate kind of grant that literally kicks you out of your comfort zone around the country or the world, talking to potential customers.
So I think Sandy, what you're referencing is the I-Corps program developed by NSF. Other agencies like NIH have also adopted similar versions after seeing how successful NSF was, and it does focus on customer discovery. And there are opportunities to do that regionally as well as nationally for people who are interested. At OHSU, we also run a program based on this. It's a much smaller scale program, but it's based on the I-Corps principles of customer discovery and follows a similar curriculum. And it's called BIP Corp, or Biomedical Innovation Program, Commercialization Readiness Program, long title. But and I know a few of you on the call have actually participated in that before. So if you're unfamiliar, I can send you some information on it as well if you want to learn more. So let's, there's one more thing I wanted to touch on with the funding fit and appropriateness of companies and research ideas. And that is there anything that's, I know Ben, you kind of touched on this, maybe we'll start with Molly this time. Is there anything that's not a good fit for crowdfunding?
Yeah, I mean, I think that what we've learned over the last handful of years is that crowdfunding tends to be most useful for early stage kind of preliminary data collection that serves as a tool to then go on to apply for the bigger grants that, you know, Sandy's talking about, NIH, et cetera. It always, you know, kind of breaks my heart as a patient when someone comes with a really amazing idea but needs to raise $2 million for a clinical trial. And, you know, unfortunately, that's just not realistic for this particular type of funding. But I would say, you know, really, again, it's more the communication of the idea than the idea itself in many cases. And, you know, historically, researchers, no offense to any who are on this, are not necessarily the best marketers of their idea. And so it's really, you know, finding ways to connect with the people that care about the work that's being done, you know, to get them excited about supporting it. So it's also just having the idea that just because you build it does not mean they will come, and really understanding that, you know, for crowdfunding specifically, it really is, success is contingent on being willing to reach out and, you know, kind of pitch your idea to the public versus a granting body, which is, you know, can be very uncomfortable for people who are not used to doing that.
Sandra or Ben, do you have anything else to add on that topic?
I can, Molly's exactly right. And having come from the research world, it was a huge transition for me personally to learn how to talk to entrepreneurs and be able to do that day in and day out. So I certainly sympathize with how sometimes daunting and uncomfortable that can be, but it is also one of the most important things that any team can do to really validate their idea. I know it's not an answer to your question. I just really wanted to put that out there, that it takes practice more than anything else. Some people have it as an innate ability, but most people really have to work at it. So it's okay to be uncomfortable with that. Yeah, just for the type of investment we do, like I said, drugs are just the hardest thing to fund because they just take so much time and so much money. And it really is beyond just about anything that's available in Oregon.
I would add one thing, and this is kind of a personal anecdote. I also, like Ben, made that transition from being raised, acculturated, I would say, as a scientist, where you're raised to think that research is the highest calling. And when I made my first switch out of the research world, I moved into the technology licensing arena at Stanford University. All my research colleagues thought I had gone to the dark side. It was hard a little bit psychologically. But the other thing that I found was that the people that I started to interact with, whether they were patent attorneys, whether they were CEOs of companies, they felt they had been acculturated in much the same way in their field. People who practice patent law think it's a very high calling. People who have run companies think if you haven't met payroll, you haven't cut your teeth at anything. So and one key point that one has to learn is just because you're really smart and you did one thing really well, it doesn't mean you're going to be able to make that leap and transition into another professional field. So from academic research into leading a successful entrepreneurial company. Some people are able to do that. It can take transition time, but I think we all need to be to retain our humility and to be willing to share and to build a team that can really take our idea forward. And the strengths that you need on the team are broader probably than the ones that any one of us can bring.
Great advice. Okay. Do either of you see any, or do any of you see common misconceptions surrounding the funding type? And if so, how can we better combat seeing these?
I can start. I think that there is an assumption that that equity investors are out to either get rich quick or want to find an idea and take that idea away from the entrepreneur and own it completely. And that is very much not the case. Especially at Elevate, what we're doing is investing in the people and investing in the ideas. And we invest in ideas because we believe in the ideas and we want to see them succeed. And when Nathan first founded Elevate, he coined the phrase mentor capital, and that's very much how we approach our investments. We are there to support our founders and to support our entrepreneurs and to try and help them be successful in any way that we can. And again, it's investment, it's not a donation, and so there is an expectation of return, but we are not there to gouge our investors, or I'm sorry, our founders. We are really there to try and work hand in hand with them to bring their ideas to the market to help as many people as we can. I can't say that's true of every venture capital fund, but that is absolutely true of the way we approach our investments. And I think any good investor should look at early stage investment that way, that it is an opportunity to help an idea get to market, not an opportunity to get rich quick. And so if you have that feeling when you're talking to a potential equity investor, maybe it's not going to be a good fit for you. On
that note, would you say that Oregon is unique in maybe providing a different type of investment sentiment than other places?
Yes, I absolutely would. And I think a big part of that comes from the Thai community, especially. Elevate is certainly the venture fund, but with the Thai Oregon Angels, they're the ones who often spend a lot of time one-on-one with entrepreneurs. And that's something that so I live in Seattle, and there are some angel groups up here that do that, but the Seattle investment community is a lot more like the Bay, that it's invest and walk away and expect some kind of return in a few years. Our investors and our mentors at both Thai and Elevate really do want to get engaged. And that's something that is much harder to find in the larger investment markets.
Thank you. Molly, are there any misconceptions that often fall around crowdfunding?
Well, I think I alluded to the biggest one, which is just because you build it does not mean they will come. And really, people kind of, the impression that I've had over the years is people think, I'm going to list a project and going to fund it right away and, go along my merry way. And unless you're willing to engage with your community, with, kind of creating the first ripples to ripple outward, it's very unlikely you're going to be successful crowdfunding. So I would say that that's kind of the first layer of misconception. I'd also say, again, there's clearly a big difference between the philanthropic crowdfunding versus equity crowdfunding. And, I think knowing kind of the sentiment, and Ben can probably speak to this even better as a investor, but the idea of, dilution, and if you're giving away equity as part of your crowdfunding campaign, it gets, it can get very complex. So we purposely stuck to the philanthropic side of it, especially because there's a large appetite for venture philanthropy. And we found that with, again, anywhere from, someone in a community who gets cancer and their friends and family don't know how to help them, and so they raise money, versus, oh, you guys, I'm so sorry. The quarantine's got to me. I lost my train of thought, but it's already starting. This is a bad sign. Anyway, just I think the being educated about the process before you actually go in, and being willing to commit. It's a roadshow of sorts. It's just a different type of roadshow. So a lot of work still goes into it.
And can you address any challenges around having sensitive research or IP complexities with multiple donors and things like that through crowdfunding?
Yeah, no, I think that my first discussion with a researcher or a founder of a biotech is that the internet is a place where anyone can find out anything you put on it. And so, it's really being cognizant and taking really your own kind of volition in terms of what you're comfortable presenting, just assuming that whatever is out there, people will find. So for our scientific advisory board, we have NDAs, and, we have a process internally that's not, public in terms of the information people can see about a project, to make sure that we vet it appropriately. But it's really up to the crowdfunding campaigner to present to the public what they're comfortable sharing.
Great. I'll move on to my last question for all of you, at least for now. I'm hoping that you can speak a little bit more about the biggest challenge associated with your funding type for people that are trying to pursue it. I know we've kind of addressed some things around team formation and understanding the market, but if you can talk about maybe some ways to overcome some of these challenges.
I'd be happy to talk about the small business grants. The challenges, I would say, historically, looking back at the numerous grants that Design Medics and LX Biotech have put in, and others I've seen, the biggest challenge is addressing all of the interests, and it's impossible to meet, of the reviewers who will be on your panel. There are times when there would be a couple of reviewers who just thought this was the best thing since sliced bread, but one person who may literally not have read the grant application very well will complain bitterly about something and give you a very low score, and there's not a lot that you can do about that. Anyone who's done basic research grants is familiar with that challenge as well. I think what you have to do is, when you're first preparing a grant and you're submitting it, you need to make sure that it hits all of the NIH, for example, lists very clearly the criteria that it scores, it asks its reviewers to score grants on. It's significance, innovation, team, and facilities. And you have to hit each of those very clearly and succinctly, so that it's hard for people to overlook. I've literally had reviewers complain about things that were answered in the grant application, but apparently too deeply buried. I think one way to strengthen your grant application is, of course, to have all of those 4 points very strongly addressed, to have strong collaborators who can be key personnel who in their own right have done an excellent job of getting grant funding and are viewed as, you know, leaders in their field. But also to have, for example, groups like Elevate Capital, other investors who might be interested in you if you got a certain, you know, if you accomplished the goals of the grant, to write a letter saying, they don't have to say they'll invest. Nobody is going to commit to do that, and then the reviewers won't expect you to. But if you have had conversations with investors, they will believe, and they are willing to write you a letter saying they're very interested in it. They will look at it seriously. They believe that what you're trying to accomplish would help them decide whether or not to invest. It shows that, again, you're getting out there talking to your potential customers, talking to your potential investors. The agencies don't want to invest in something that is going to die once the grant is over. They want to invest in something that has a clear path. And an investor writing a letter, a strategic partner, in our case, we occasionally were able to have a pharmaceutical company say that they would take it seriously and write a letter in support. Those things can really strengthen an application.
Okay.
I think maybe this will be a common theme, but it is learning how to tell a compelling story and then telling that compelling story and making sure that it is tailored to your audience. So to Sandy's point, making sure that the grant application gets the main points across in a way that the reviewers can pick up on and understand easily. It's the same when you're talking to equity investors. It's building that story that this is an opportunity, that it has a market that wants this, and that you know how to capture that market. And that you also have the ability to get additional, get funds from additional sources, whether that's other non-dilutive grants, whether you've talked to strategic partners, if it's by generating revenue. It's making that story really compelling for investors. And I think, excuse me, one of the other challenges is maintaining that humility when you're talking to investors. You're never pitching for funds in a vacuum. It's always, your idea is always being compared to other ideas, and the feedback that you may get, and if whether you get a no or a yes, is often not a judgment on you personally, but it is a judgment about how the idea compares to the 4 or 5 other ideas that are being considered at the same time. And understanding that and being open to the feedback is a real value and a real trait that investors look for.
Can I flip that question a little bit, or flip
Sure.
around what you said? And how can a startup, a company, a founder, how can they evaluate the investor to make sure that they're a good fit?
That's a great question. One, talk to them. If you don't have a good conversation or you don't get a good feeling from the conversation, it's not going to be a good fit. In taking money from an equity investor is very much a marriage, and it should take time for you to be comfortable enough to take money from that person or that group. Very, very rarely do we find that a single meeting is enough to convince someone to invest, and even less commonly do we see that ultimately is a good investment. what I like to see at both TIE and Elevate is at least 6 months of contact and communication. That lets both sides establish a rapport. It lets both sides understand what the communication styles are like, what to expect from each other, and then get comfortable that the expectations can be met on both sides. For a startup who's trying to evaluate an investor, any investor should be willing to give you introductions to their portfolio companies. And if they don't want to, that might be a red flag. And you should absolutely take the opportunity to talk to CEOs that they've invested in. And really take those conversations to heart and ask some hard questions. Ask, how is the investor when it comes to working with you on the board? Or how is the investor when you had to deliver bad news? Or what kind of benefit did the investor bring? Were they able to make introductions? Were they able to give you advice that was good, or has their advice been not so good? Those are the kinds of questions you want to ask of companies that have received funding from those investors.
Great. Molly, did you have anything to add on the subject before we open to audience questions?
Well, Melissa, I think this might be a good time for Molly-Anna to give my kind of life lesson. This really kind of very much piggybacks on what both Sandy and Ben have said. But, you know, I now have a bar in life where, you know, if my cancer comes back tomorrow, do I want to be working with this person today? And I've found that to be an excellent screening tool to figure out the people that I want to surround myself with, people that I can learn from, people that will support me, people who I can add value to. And I think that, you know, clearly that goes for investors, that goes for, you know, philanthropic donors. But I also just think that goes for people that you partner with, people that you pick as your mentors. You know, I think that really finding that fit is not only important, but it just makes life so much more fun. I mean, you know, again, it's too short. Molly-Anna's done now.
Well, that's great. I would like to open the floor. I've asked a lot of questions, so would the audience like to ask any questions of our panelists?
Let's actually add one. So we might have a lot of researchers on the call that are thinking about starting a company. I was wondering if three of you had advice about how he or she might decide to do that or not do that. Many times it does start with SBIRs because you have to be a company to be funded as an SBIR. So that's a decision that researchers have to make just to apply for an SBIR. But I've often had researchers talk to me and struggle with that. What advice would you have for them?
So I'm happy to give the first response to that one. In the past, I haven't seen it so much recently, I think researchers would think, oh, I'll set up a company and then I'll be able to have more sources of funding for my basic research. If that's your reason for applying, you know, for setting up a company, that it's not a very strong one. These small business grants are really designed for product development. So if what you want to do is have your work, you know, accomplish something in the world beyond knowledge and publication, but actually developing a product, making an impact on people's lives, then it's worth going through, because it can be a lot of work. Initially, to simply set up an LLC can be very easy, and an LLC corporation can apply for small business grants. But the grant application, I think I mentioned, they want more and more on the small business grant review side. They want to believe that you're serious about product development, that you've thoughtfully put together a team for that. So, but you have to do that one step at a time. You can't do that all at once necessarily. So it's possible to set up a company and apply for a grant relatively early. You will need your own facilities for carrying out the grant. So that is a bar that you need to be able to get over as well. And that often can be accomplished by renting space at one of the accelerators or incubators. So Portland State Business Accelerator or OBI, Oregon Bioscience Incubator, PI, depending on what your product is that you're developing.
I think another really good question to ask is how would you feel if it doesn't work out? To Sandy's point, you have to be willing to do the product development if you want to take this far enough to build a company out of it instead of just support the basic science. And so if it doesn't work out, are you committing full time to that? Are you going to have someone from your lab be the full-time commitment and you have an advisory role? Really understand what are you looking to get out of starting a company? And then I guess the other thing is, before you go down that path, really take advantage of the opportunities that are there to test the waters, like the BIP Corp program or I-Corp, or working with tech transfer, or partnering with an academic institution like Portland State or Oregon State to see what kind of development you can do without taking that final leap to say, okay, we're starting a company and we're going to spin this out and this is going to be our full-time focus. So do as much research as you can without that full commitment, so you really know this is where I want to go.
Great, thanks.
Anyone from the audience, feel free to jump in with questions, or you can send them to me in the chat and we can ask them for you.
Molly, I had a quick question for you. It sounds like you have transitioned from funding research to funding some companies. Is the model the same? It's philanthropic, or do you syndicate people and do anything different?
We kept the model the same, Tom. It's still philanthropic, and I would say our vetting process is more rigorous for for-profit companies, as is the level of transparency that we require in terms of letting donors know that this could someday make money for this lab or organization. This does not, you do not get equity in exchange for your donation. So just providing that transparency has been key for us. We're all about just being as transparent as possible, but we have not opted to go the equity route, but have really seen pent-up demand in the philanthropic side and decided to really focus on that.
Okay, great.
Ken, you could go ahead and ask your question. If you can unmute
You
yourself.
should be unmuted now.
You are.
I think anyway. And I guess I could turn on my video too so people can actually see me. Although I've been on TV way too much recently with the whole craziness. But that's actually the question that I wanted to bring up, given the craziness and particularly the gyrations in the financial markets. I was just on a webinar earlier. What do all these gyrations mean, particularly from Ben, in terms of venture capital investments, et cetera, but also to some extent from Molly, because I'm guessing that some of these donations might also have to do with how liquid people feel. And so if either or both of you could comment on that, I'd greatly appreciate it.
You want to go ahead, Molly?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think at this point, Ken, it's too early to know kind of the longer term ramifications, but it's a pretty direct linear relationship between stock market and philanthropic giving. We've seen an interesting trend toward donor advised funds in the last handful of years in terms of a tool that's becoming more popular versus family foundations, et cetera. And so in many cases, people have already donated a large chunk into those donor advised funds. So it's yet to be seen if those will be more rapidly directed toward nonprofit organizations or not, particularly organizations kind of addressing some of the needs that are becoming quickly apparent with this pandemic.
And I'm just going to echo what Molly said. We're going to see it's just going to take time to see how it plays out in the venture world. It is going to be more challenging. I think that's pretty much a guarantee. And so the story that you tell, the idea that you have, the problem that you're solving has to be that much more compelling to really catch the eye of investors. If it's addressing something that is immediately applicable, like for instance, a vaccine for coronavirus, then you might be able to get funding a lot more quickly. And I think that's actually going to probably hurt even more because it's going to push a lot of really good and necessary ideas to the side because of the acute nature of dealing with this current crisis. On the other hand, you could also conceive of a world where in 3 to 4 months, once things hopefully have started to settle down, that there are a lot more opportunities because people have shifted their focus and now they're looking for a way to get involved and give back, even if it's not directly related to what's happening today, but they see the value of investing in medical technology and the kinds of treatments or cures that can help people on a daily basis and prevent these kinds of outbreaks in the future.
This is Nitin. If I may add to what Ben just said, would that be all right?
Please.
Can I actually, Nitin, before you do that, just so everybody knows, Nitin is the managing director at Elevate.
So I think there's a couple of things that I want to point out. I think today, anybody that's doing anything that's essential care, essential to the problem that we're facing, are going to get funding. There's enough dry powder with venture capitalists, especially ones that have been newly formed, that have been recently funded. There's plenty of dry powder. They also have dry powder. The bigger funds have dry powder to support follow-on funding for their portfolio. So the existing companies that have already received some funding and they need bridge loans or bridge funding, there's some capital out there for that. Something that to keep in mind, and I've been investing since 2010, that every time there is an economic downturn, more ideas pop up, and their valuations are much better than pre-economic downturn. So I'm very certain that, and I was actually in a 4-hour call with Oregon Growth Board today, where they were talking about the evaluators for Oregon Growth Board were talking about how many of their portfolio funds, are obviously going to be looking for good deals because they've recently raised or have dry powder to make investments. So while it'll definitely impact the investment scene, but the smart VCs are still going to be looking for opportunities to invest despite the adverse situation that we're in. I mean, we're too early to even know how long this is going to last. But companies that are fundable, that have good ideas and the valuations are good, will get funded.
And I'd also add that 10 years ago or so, during the Great Recession, one of the things the federal government did to stimulate the economy was to put out a good deal more grant funding opportunities. So that may come to pass. Will they focus them in certain areas? I don't know. That may be building in the background at the moment. Research institutions are literally sending people home from the basic research labs. So clearly that stimulation won't be able to be effective until we see the pandemic concerns die down. But I think on the small business grant side, that will come into play as well.
And I would just echo that, Sandy, and say, Facebook has already announced $100 million in small business grants that they're going to be starting to accept applications for. So I also anticipate that there are going to be some large companies who maybe aren't as detrimentally impacted by this shift, who are going to step up as well. And similarly on the philanthropic side, the Gates Foundation, there are already a number of large foundations who are specifically funding opportunities in the, COVID vaccines and testing, et cetera. But right. I think that will also be a source of ongoing opportunity, particularly as we see kind of what the life cycle of this outbreak is.
Yeah, I think I saw the Small Business Association similarly has a large fund that they've set aside for grants as well. We do have a question from Anil in the audience. His question is towards you, Molly. He's wondering if there are any local companies we might know of that have been funded through Consano.
Not any for-profit companies, no. We've worked extensively with researchers at the night, but not any. Actually, most of the for-profit companies have been in California, actually, both LA and the Bay Area.
But some research has been funded locally then.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Great.
Yeah, UW, OHSU, and again, as I mentioned earlier, Dr. Drucker has been an amazing mentor and strategic advisor for our organization in general. So I have a very soft place in my heart for OHSU.
And anyone can go to your site and just kind of flip through who has a campaign up there.
You got it.
Any other questions from the audience? There's no incentive since we're not in person. Were you going to say something, Ben? I had another question that I would ask.
For people who are considering, this is going back to Tom's question, for people who are considering starting a company and aren't sure if they want to do it, use you can talk to me or Molly or Sandy or you, Melissa, to get contacts in the world that you're thinking about trying to raise money from, and just have conversations. That's one of the most important things to do, is to start having those conversations before you actually take that step. And I think you'll get a lot of good ideas if you're open to the feedback and the opportunity to learn from different perspectives.
Good point. Ken, go ahead.
Yeah, I just had one quick shout out, kind of following up on the I-Core thing. As you can tell by the beard, I'm an academic, so that's kind of obvious. But many of you also know that I'm co-founder of a small company, Stone Stable, which is in the vaccine space. So I think I want to get offline and talk to some of these people at Elevate Capital too, but we can do that at a separate time. So we were just on the I-Core. Actually, we did the BIP Core, and then we just finished a local I-Core node through Washington State. And it's absolutely all about finding your customers. So I really can't recommend that program enough. It really, mind-blowing is maybe a little extreme, but it was close. Just in terms of really just completely changing my mindset in terms of thinking about the customer, trying to get into the customer's shoes, basically live the life of your customers. And that made a huge difference. It's not, as Molly was saying, it's, we built this wonderful thing, everyone's going to love it. Well, how much do they love it? Do they love it enough to pay for it? These are the kinds of things that were not obvious at all to me. And so that really the customer discovery thing was incredibly useful. So I just highly recommend that to people.
I have another question for you all. If you, Sandra, you are, but if you were working on a healthcare innovation or technology, maybe not necessarily a startup, what mechanism of funding would you pursue? And is it not on this panel? Is there something else you might pursue?
There were some smaller grants that are available. The University Venture Development Fund is a nice mechanism in Oregon. I think it's still, been a refresh on that, but that one gets through, if one is a researcher, you can get through your university. And Melissa, you can probably speak to that, but that's an example of smaller, I don't know why the word practice came to mind, but grants that can enable you to generate literally an additional data set or a small proof of concept that can get you ready to apply for the larger grants. The state of Oregon, Business Oregon, has some grants which people are probably familiar with. If you're not, please give me an email or contact and I'll help you with that. They have grants that are specifically designed to help you write a small business grant application. They call it a phase 0 application. So there's some resources like that locally that are very helpful in the very first stages of even considering transferring something from the basic research world into a company.
I would chime in and say that I think, again, given my personal connection to the work that I'm doing, I would always start by looking for other people who have either done something similar or done, you know, something in a different industry that, you know, kind of aligns with what you're thinking, and start to gauge, you know, are there ways to work together and, you know, or, you know, leverage kind of the work that other people have already done to inform, you know, the decisions that you're making as well. And I think that there's an untapped, you know, wealth of people who have a lot of insight that I think before I even went, you know, would go to solicit investment or philanthropic donations, you know, I would start there and really talk to the people on the ground.
And I think you'll find that people are often willing to help. It seems like such a you know, a thing to overcome in the beginning, even a cold call or something like that. But people are often very willing to help and provide advice. And Ben, what about you? Would you go for seed investment or another source?
I would not start there. I would definitely start with grant funding or some kind of community support, because that's really how you're going to develop the kernel of the business. And to Ken's point, that's equity investors don't want to essentially pay you to go do customer discovery. They want you to already have done customer discovery. So that's why I would not start there. But once you get there, yes, absolutely. I think the finding the right investors gives you, I know this is a self-serving answer, but finding the right investors really does give you the opportunity to expand your network exponentially. And for an organization like TIE, TIE Oregon supports the local community, but TIE is a global organization. And we have mentors and investors all over the world. One of our portfolio companies, Hemex Health, raised over $1 million from the larger TIE network. And it was specifically because of the connection she was able to make with investors in India that she was able to advance her product development and rollout specifically in India and get connected with the Indian government for doing product development and getting their test into the hands of the people who really need it. So I think there is a lot to be said for that, but only at the right stage.
Great, thank you. Is there anything else that we've not asked that we should have? Any other resources? You mentioned a lot of resources throughout the talk, jumbled in there, but are there any other resources or things we should know?
I see that Doug Kawahara mentioned family offices, which are somewhat nebulous to find. You kind of need to know the right people to talk to. Once you know them, you get in front of them, but it's more of a word of mouth type of thing. So kind of hard to get into that space.
You can certainly pay for a list of family offices. I think it's several thousands of dollars, and that just gets you contact information, which is often not the best way to get in touch with them. So to your point, Tom, it is very much word of mouth and personal network and introductions.
Great. So for the everyone on the call, I just sent in the chat box a link to a Google form that has just a few questions to fill out and give us some feedback on the event, if you wouldn't mind. I'll also send it out in an email, but it's there just in case. If there are no other questions, I think we can feel free to wrap up for the evening a little bit early. Thank you all so much for being with us, and an extra special thank you to our panelists for bearing in there with us. If you didn't register for this, but you joined, or if you would like to make sure that you receive information from us around upcoming innovation-related events or opportunities, you can please feel free to send me your email address, either in the chat box or directly to either Tom, Sarah, or I, and we'll make sure to get you connected. Sarah also, I know, had a brief comment before we end as well. Thank you for the reminder.
Hey, so I'm just going to share my screen real quick. Hold on one second. I'm just going to make sure it shares the right screen. It's going to stop your screen share. Is it okay, Melissa? Yes.
Yes, I already turned mine off. But Great. Connect.
So I did want to mention one event that we do have coming up. And this also mention that this date is going to be changing, but I want to mention it anyway to get it on your guys' radar. And this is called the OHSU Inventathon, and it is a partnership between a number of different departments and offices at OHSU, including Oaktree, and including collaborations and entrepreneurship. I know we have Aditi here as well on the call from that office. And this is an event that we are partnering on with MIT Hacking Medicine. And essentially, we are going to be focused on the idea generation side of things and on working together with people from across the region who have expertise in a diversity of areas to essentially try to come up with, kickstart new ideas, and vet those ideas and start to build solutions over the course of the weekend. So I just wanted to get that on people's radar in particular because we are going to be shifting one of our focus areas to under the digital health and health IT track to management of pandemics. So it is quite relevant to some of the things that are going on in all of our lives right now. And we will be changing the date to sometime in September, but I just wanted to get it on folks' radar, and you can stay up to date with kind of what we have in the works there on inventathon.org, and you can see a list of some of our wonderful partners and sponsors on that page as well. So just wanted to share that with all of you. And thank you guys so much for being here tonight, and thank you to all of our wonderful panelists and to Melissa for moderating.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Everyone.
Appreciate it.
Stay healthy, everyone.
Yes, please.
Take good care.
Bye. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.